DFS Fridays, buckle up here for 3-4+ hours of nonstop DFS content. We're going to kick things off with the Block Party DFS show with JMToWin, going through the slate position by position, getting his best plays, and then, of course, building a lineup on DraftKings with his favorite building blocks. We're then going to have the Run the Sims crew swinging by, Youdacao, and I believe NerdyTenor, fresh off of his $300,000 showdown score last night, is going to be in the saddle with us. And then we'll pivot over to Off and On the Clock, where we will do our underdog strategy for this week 4 slate. But as we always do, we're getting started with JM. Let's get ready for the block party.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crash 5 bullets to your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Hey, everyone. Indeed, JMToWin from 1 week season, as we always do. How did week 3 treat you? How are we feeling heading into week 4?
Feel great heading into week 4. Week 3 was one of those weird weeks where I had a bunch of runouts and didn't get them, but really happy with the slate. And yeah, really excited about what we've got on tap for this one this week. Looks like we got some late news in terms of right before the show with Jaden Daniels out. We're still waiting on some other stuff, but yeah, the slate's starting to take shape and there's some stuff to like on this one for sure.
Yep. That was the one piece of news I saw as well. It was already trending to Terry McLaurin being out, but we got that confirmation. Yep. And then Jaden Daniels, I thought, was actually trending to play. So that is
agreed.
A little bit of a surprise there. So we get another week of Marcus Mariota. I was looking, I mean, our block last week, we had the Caleb and the Rome there. We had a lot of the pieces. The Saint stuff didn't really get home, but I thought that block was strong. I ended up playing a similar lineup.
Yeah, we talked on the show. We hit on the Rashid Shaheed one. My preference was the Olave, Juwan Johnson one, which obviously hit better. And in the context of the slate, in terms of what you needed, last week was one of those weeks, A.J. Brown putting up 25.9 points was kind of a separator, right? Like just getting those solid scores was really nice. And pairing Juwan and Olave, that was kind of a solid score that you got right there. And yeah, I've got a good read right now, I feel, on this these Bears games, right? We had the Lions-Bears game a couple weeks ago. And I kept talking all week about like what the mindset would be for the Lions in terms of how they like to, win the battle of wills and keep their foot on the opponent's neck when they have the chance, especially if it's a division opponent, conference opponent, Ben Johnson having left. And so, people kept being surprised at that 4th and 5, go for it, 4th and goal, go for it from the 5 up 3 scores. And it's like, no, that's in line with what we could have been expecting here. And then last week, just a great spot for the Bears because the Bears offense does look like 85% there. It's just little things that keep messing up drives. And so, against the Cowboys, it looked like a spot where we could expect that to kind of click over. And so, it's nice when you kind of are in a groove with a particular team that ends up being an important team. And so there's some stuff to talk about with that team again this week. And really interesting week too, because we've got injuries at the running back position. We have, again, some injuries at the quarterback position. We have some interesting matchups. And I think it'll be a fun week for tournaments this week.
Yeah, before we do the slate overview, I always like to pick your brain a little bit about some evergreen topics. I'm curious, like what contests are your favorite to play right now? Because I know you kind of play all over the board, the large field, some smaller stuff. But where do you feel like you got your groove or your sweet spot right now?
Yeah, so I usually put in 6K on a weekend, and so 1,300 of that is max entering the slant. And then the other 4,600 is just kind of mix and match of single entry 3 max. So the spy, the double spy, the power sweep. And then usually in the past, I've always played the game changer, which is the 1,500 single entry. First 3 weeks, I've actually done like 555 3 entries or 400 3 entry instead of that 1,500 going to the game changer, just because early in the season, I didn't want to concentrate so many bets on one particular roster. Because for me, my single entry 3 max, single entry, I might have 8 or 9 different rosters that I'm mixing and matching across single entry. So it's not that pressure of, I'm making this one roster that's going in. So this week, I mentioned to you before the show, but William, my 6-year-old, has his first go-kart race on Saturday, and it's an all-day thing. So I'm not doing MME this week because of the amount of extra time that takes. And so I'm single entry 3 max this week. I've got a reserved entry in the game changer. And so, kind of expecting to swing over to that. But single entry 3 max. And I think that, as always, there's edge there because if people are putting in one roster, they tend to play a little bit too conservatively. And so if we can just treat those as tournament rosters, we get an edge over time.
There you go. Star Tours calling it. William, future F1 champion, right there, Mr. William. When you do play 3 to 4 rosters, or let's say, in like a tighter single entry, do you do you rotate your stacks more, or do you rotate your core around those stacks do you have, or is it just completely slate dependent?
Yeah, completely slate dependent. So last week it was, I think 35% of my rosters were Caleb Williams rosters in MME. And then about 40 to 45% of my single entry 3 max bankroll was on Caleb Williams. And then, so it's kind of like whoever my highest own, I scale up that exposure in single entry 3 max. And then, last week it was like, well, I really think Caleb Williams is the stack. But if it fails, right, we still have a guy who has been inconsistent. We still have a young offense. It's kind of finding its footing. So it was like, if it fails, what could hit? And that was my focus last week. And throughout the week, it kept being like, it's really a pretty spread out pool. So last week, it was like concentrated on Caleb Williams. And then my other roster was like, one roster of this stack, one roster of this stack, right? Kind of mixed and matched. Yeah. And then usually, and I talked to people about this in the player grid, like the best way to use, we had a guy a couple weeks ago who won $190,000 off of $400 in entry fees. And he was talking about how he came to his roster. And it was like, oh, well, I really liked these things that Mike was talking about. And I like these things that JM was talking about. And I like that nobody was really hyping up Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so I knew that he would be low owned. And so like, that's, I think, the best way to use any site really, but is to just like use that to balance off of your own thoughts and use the thoughts from different people. And so I've talked about the way to use my player grid is like, when I say a guy's a blue chip player, a light blue chip player, or even like this is my single entry 3 max pool, that doesn't mean that on a single entry 3 max roster, I'm just saying, all right, I only want these guys, right? I'm going to take some of these higher risk swings, even in single entry 3 max. It's more that if I'm filling out a roster, right? I've got this higher risk swing and this higher risk stack, maybe on a single entry 3 max. Okay, now I've taken on enough risk. What are the pieces I feel really confident in that I sort of mix and match around that? And I can just pull from that tighter pool and say what fits pricing wise, what fits in terms of the structure of this roster, and go from there.
Love it. Some good stuff there. And yeah, that's my favorite thing too about, listening to a bunch of people you trust is getting that idea generation, and you can cherry pick some ideas that work for you, discard some other things, and then come up with a game plan that makes sense for you. Speaking of game plans, let's do an overview here of this week 4 slate. I mean, when I first looked at some of these totals in these game environments, I was getting really excited, specifically this late game window, JM, where we have 4 games, all with totals over 47 here. But what's standing out to you just from a bird's eye view?
Yeah, the late games, we've got some competitive games. We've got the Bears and Raiders. We have the Chiefs and Ravens. We have spots where we could see scoring in terms of 2 teams pushing each other, right? I think a question a lot that we'll see a lot this week is like, well, what about the Bills? What about the Lions? They have the highest implied team totals, but you kind of have 2 teams that spread the, not to say that we can't get tournament winners from those teams, but you have 2 teams that spread the ball around and that are expected to win their game pretty handily. And then we've got these other games where it's like, oh, these games could be competitive. Even the 49ers-Jags game probably doesn't skew to the upside as much because of the way Trevor Lawrence has looked. And obviously that can click over, but you usually start to see signs of that before it totally clicks over. But yeah, like there's these games that could be competitive, which we really like on a week like this because that gives the opportunity for back and forth. That gives the opportunity for the type of game environment that you had to have in order to win on the weekend. So yeah, I think that's important to pay attention to this week.
Yeah, yes, we got those nice late games there. The one game with a decent total in the 1 p.m. window is that Bills Saints. Obviously, the Bills doing most of the heavy lifting with their team total there. Any other spots that kind of stand out to you from like a macro standpoint before we dive into quarterbacks?
No, yeah, I think we're good to dive into quarterbacks. Anything that we're missing, we'll hit on kind of in that space.
Perfect. All right, let's do it. Let's head over to quarterbacks here. I mean, 3rd straight week where we continue to have these low-priced quarterbacks pop up. Week 2, it was the 4K Mac Jones. Last week, we had the 4K Mariota. This week, we get a 4,500 Jackson Dart. I am kind of curious, just kind of your read on him as a prospect, how he fits into this offense, and then if that price in matchup makes sense for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't expect to get a Jackson Dart question. So yeah, we've got a. I'm always prepared, Pete. We've got a like a guy who most people didn't see as a 1st round pick, right? A fringe 1st round pick, but a lot of things that he did well in the preseason in terms of like his ability to be athletic. Like he looked more athletic on the NFL field than people probably expected. Had more zip on the ball than people probably expected. And what I also like is you have him and Cam Skattebo coming into the lineup on the same week. So you're kind of turning over to like, okay, we've got the youth here, not the Tyrone Tracy's not a young guy, but there's some excitement in the way that Cam Skattebo plays and the energy that he exudes and how that probably bleeds out to other players on the team. And so, look, the Chargers, to me, one of the top 5 or 6 defenses in the NFL. One of the things that I like about this spot, and so I've thought a lot about Jackson Dart this week from the context of how it relates to the game environment and Amari and Hampton and Justin Herbert, these guys who are going to be popular. But I actually think they can keep this game more competitive. So the Chargers, what makes them really good is how difficult Jesse Minter makes the processing on the quarterback. But that's something that Jackson Dart, I won't say he excels at. He's a rookie in his first game, but that's something that he's equipped to do well at over time, right? And so I think that this is the spot where we can see them move the ball. We can see them be competitive. And really what this Giants offense was missing is the ability to march the field. You got Russell Wilson, who's like, I can't throw a 5-yard out. I can't throw a slant over the middle. Yeah. Can we do bombs away? Like, yeah, I can do that. And so there's this opportunity for this Giants offense to actually look quite a bit better because they can call a more conventional offense and actually march the field. So, no, I mean, I hate this matchup. I'm not on Jackson Dart this week.
Okay.
And I do think that the Giants can keep this game competitive enough that the Justin Herbert love, like, it isn't just totally going into the gutter because I think this can be the type of game where, yes, the Chargers are probably in control, but they're having to play throughout the game, which is what we really want.
Yeah, let's go. My initial glance at ownership at quarterback makes it seem like this is going to be really spread out again. I don't see any of the elite guys really bubbling up over 10%, and then enough of these kind of cheap guys spreading things out. But let's start at the top end. We obviously get Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson back on the main slate. Both of them have pretty good team totals here. Do you see yourself paying up for either of them at 7,700 and 7,500?
Yeah, I'll never argue against Josh Allen, but I won't go to him in games like this. He tops 25 DraftKings points only 5 times last year. We know how this team wants to call these games. Like this was after that huge game in week 1. That was my caution, was like, guys, don't just overreact to what he did in the box score. He did that because of the game environment. That's not how the Bills are calling their games. And so it's hard for Josh Allen to justify this price tag just based on how they're calling these games unless the Saints are pushing them. So yeah, I won't ever argue against Josh Allen, but it's really hard for him to post a score you had to have in a game where this Bills offense is in complete control. Lamar is interesting because I've seen a lot of like Lamar versus Spags stats this week, Lamar versus the Chiefs, but he played them in the playoffs in 2023, that first game of 2024. He hadn't played them other than that since like 2021. So there's a big gap and like a lot of growth for a player. And so typically we don't want quarterbacks against this Chiefs defense, especially expensive quarterbacks. But what I like about this game is you have a game where both of these teams are going to be treating it like a playoff game. Not to say that these teams can't make the playoffs starting 1 and 3. But that's a huge hole to dig out of, especially for the Chiefs, right? You got the Lions still coming up before Rashee Rice comes back. And so I think both these teams are going to kind of throw the Superman cape on their quarterbacks and let them go try to win this game. And so I think that Lamar Jackson is very much in play in this spot. He's in play to me in the same way that, like I said earlier, like A.J. Brown put up 25.9 last week. And that was a pretty notable score, right? So if we have a week like that where a quarterback puts up 27, 28, that ends up being a notable score, I think that's where Lamar Jackson fits. Obviously, he can put up more than that, but I'll be surprised against this defense if he's going for 34, 35, right? Like the conventional had to have it score at his price tag, but I think he can put up one of these high 20 type games. If he misses, he's probably in the low 20s, and that's not a bad range to be in. So he's not like a priority for me yet. I kind of keep going back and forth on him, but I do think that it's totally fine to go to this game environment because game environment over matchup always for me, right? Because once the scoring takes off, you get 2 good offenses, not to say that the Chiefs are necessarily a good offense right now, but you get 2 good offenses, like that overrides good defenses. And so just the nature of how this game sets up from like a player perspective, a team perspective, a human perspective of like, hey guys, all our chips on the table on this game, we got to go out there and win it. I think it sets up well for one of these quarterbacks or even both these quarterbacks to do something special.
Well, yeah, let's just quickly hit on Mahomes just because you did mention liking this game environment. I mean, he's about as cheap as we've seen Mahomes. I do think there are some nice factors, working in his favor, just the overall matchup. And then on top of that, supposedly getting Xavier Worthy back, which, can't hurt. I don't know how effective he will be coming back from that shoulder injury, but any thoughts on Mahomes here? Because at $6K, he does look pretty good from a points per dollar perspective.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I opened ownership just as we started the show for the first time this week, and I was surprised, disappointed. I mentioned Drake May in my journal on Discord earlier in the week, and it was like, I kind of was like trying to justify it to readers, like, I know you guys are going to think this is crazy to like this guy. And I look and he's like projected to be the highest owned quarterback. Mahomes up here. I was like, oh, this is going to be sneaky, me being on Mahomes. But I just think that in this spot, now the Worthy thing is interesting, right? I would prefer for Worthy to not play because I don't think people would want to play Tyquan Thornton, but it looks pretty clear that Worthy's going to play now. And then that swings me over. Just as a DFS player, my immediate thought is like, people aren't going to feel comfortable playing Xavier Worthy in his first game back, and he got the shoulder harness, and is he going to be on a pitch count? But then you're like, yeah, but is he going to be on a pitch count? Is this an issue? And so it's tough to say who to stack Mahomes with. I do think that Mahomes plus Worthy is a really interesting stack. I think that there's a chance that Tyquan Thornton ends up staying pretty involved in this offense. So Mahomes plus Tyquan Thornton also remains viable. But just from a Mahomes perspective, yeah, I mean, you see these scores, 26, 23.1, and then obviously the 13.2 in a game they controlled. I'll be surprised if he's under that 23.1 mark because Ravens haven't looked good on defense. We know that the Chiefs are going to have to win this game. We know the Chiefs can't run the ball. And so they're going to put the ball in Mahomes' hands and say, go win this game for us. And so we like that with a quarterback like Mahomes, where we know that that's how they're going to try to win the game. We can place our bets on that and just say, look, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, obviously not in his best offense he's ever been in, not looking the best he's ever looked, but kind of riding some money on just betting on Mahomes doing well in a game where they ask him to take over isn't a bad place to be this week.
Let's go ahead and talk about Drake May. I mean, I felt he was so close to like a 30-point explosion last week. You know, Ramondre fumbles at the goal line. He has the interception that gets tipped. You mentioned here, he looks like he's going to be fairly popular, but I also think most stuff is going to be spread out enough that it's not like I'm not willing to play it because it looks, super chalky. So what do you think about May at home versus Carolina?
Yeah, it's interesting. The Panthers are actually like pretty decent at pass defense, and then they're not as bad against the run as people perceive them to be based off of last year. Derek Brown's back, and they've done well in 2 of their 3 games, decent in 2 of their 3 games, but they're still an attackable run defense. And so teams tend to lean on that run game against them because it's easier to run against them than it is to throw against them. So it's harder to rack up those counting stats. But at the same time, so I this last week, I've been watching all the games this year, and this last week, 7 of the games, I actually graded each drive of each team. So 14 teams, I graded their entire drives based on like the play sequencing, the execution, trying to take matchup out of it. And the Patriots were one of my highest grade. They were like 6 out of these 14 teams, even accounting for all the fumbles, right? And I don't dock those a ton because it's like those aren't necessarily repeatable offenses, but you got to dock them. That's ruining a drive. And so the Patriots really looked sharp. Like it was, I said it like this, the old Belichick model was just force the opponent to do 10, 12, 14 play drives because most teams can't do that, right? And if you just make them do that over and over again, they're going to have a holding penalty, a false start, take a sack, drop a pass, whatever it is that sets them behind the sticks and they have to punt or kick the field goal. Whereas on offense, the Patriots were always like, and we can do that ourselves. We can drive the field. We can keep the defense off balance. And it kind of looks like that Brady offense in terms of how McDaniels was calling it last week, the rhythm and flow of it, where they were able to pick up 7 yards on first down, 2 yards, 15 yards, another 11 yards, right? And it was just like play action, run, quarterback keeper on a boot, like, and just a great feel for how to keep the defense off balance. So like I say all that to say, I really like the way this offense looks. And 4 fumbles plus an end zone interception on a tip pass, like that skews the perception a little bit from like what it could have been, right? The Patriots could have won that game 38-14 instead of, or 38-21, whatever it was, instead of losing it 21-14. And so, yeah, I do like this spot for the Patriots. And then the question is, who do you pair Drake May with? So maybe we'll get to that as we get a little bit deeper into this. But the math really doesn't make a ton of sense if you're just taking a quarterback solo. If another quarterback is going to hit even less often, but hit with somebody that you know they're going to hit with. And so I always try to think about what's the value of this guy for just taking him solo versus guessing on the stacking partner versus potentially getting a stacking partner that we can rely on. So I do think there's an interesting way to play Drake May this week.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic with those guys because if you're looking at sim tools and stuff like those naked quarterback builds or even skinny stack builds, they just won't pop as much because of that dynamic we've talked about where it's like you're having to get more things right. Like you don't get the benefit of the correlation. On the other hand, we get these spots where it's like Mariota looked at like he was in a really good spot last week, and Drake May. I ended up forcing a Drake May team with Henry and Metcalf was one of my better teams last week, even though it didn't grade out, well in any sims because it's like I like this spot. So sometimes you got to make the sacrifice of the correlation and loving the overall, matchup. I'm going to throw like 4 names at you in this 5K range, and you can pick, any of these guys you want to talk about. I'll toss out Daniel Jones versus the Rams, obviously Caleb Williams versus the Raiders. I will include Geno Smith, and let's toss in Marcus Mariota as well. I know that's a lot, but you got anyone that stands out from that bunch for you?
Yeah, Caleb stands out to me the most. I think Caleb and Mahomes, with Mahomes being at 6K and Caleb being at 5,800, like this is a range where you kind of get down to the Daniel Jones, right? And you're like, okay, but he's not that much cheaper than these other guys, right? He's 5,600, or you get down to like 5,100 guys. It's like, yeah, but like, what are we really saving here? I think that Caleb and Mahomes are the quarterbacks to beat in your thinking. So again, that doesn't mean like the way we should try to think about DFS is the range of outcomes and account for that range of outcomes, recognizing that on Sunday things might play out to the downside, right? So I'm not saying Caleb and Mahomes are going to be the two highest scoring quarterbacks. What I'm saying is if we played out this slate over and over again, those are the guys who are most consistently going to be quarterbacks producing solid to strong to maybe even elite scores, right? So I'm kind of judging everything off of those two guys. So to me, Caleb is, I just really like the way this offense, I really like Ben Johnson. I really like the way this offense looks. And he seems to be doing a great job at like getting buy-in from this team and getting this team to really like understand the steps they need to be taking in order to be elite, right? And so every year we're seeing progress from this Bears offense. I think it's going to continue. And then, yeah, like Geno is kind of in that bucket of he can always hit, right? I had some Geno stacks last week with that mindset of like, okay, Geno can always throw some downfield throws and hit. Unfortunately, I was pairing him with Dante Thornton for the downfield throws instead of Trey Tucker. But like that's on the table for Geno. But in a game against Caleb Williams, I still say like Caleb probably drives this game forward first with Geno trailing. And then I do like the Daniel Jones one, because we have a similar to what I said about the Chiefs and Ravens. We have a game that's going to be competitive between two good offenses. And so that automatically creates an opportunity for points to snowball. And so Daniel Jones, been saying since the start of the season that we thought that he would look good in this offense, and then been saying he actually looks good in this offense. His offense looks good. And so as long as they can keep him clean, which is a tall task against the Rams, but it was a tall task against the Broncos too, and they did it. As long as they can keep him clean, I like this spot for Daniel Jones as well. So yeah, honestly, all these quarterbacks you threw out there, I like them. I think that Mahomes and Caleb are sort of the gold standard that I'm judging these guys against. And as somebody who's playing primarily single entry 3 max this week, it's going to be, again, it's Friday morning, but probably a lot of Mahomes and Caleb for me. And then picking like these handful of other spots, a Drake May, a Justin Herbert, a Geno Smith, a Daniel Jones, whatever it might be, to throw in there alongside these guys.
One quick note about Caleb, and I'm sure we might touch on it on the other positions, but I was even looking at this for some of my underdog drafts. I'm like, he's kind of hard to stack right now because there's Rome, who's clearly emerging with this year 2 breakout. But beyond that, it's like there's some cannibalization going on with like the Olamide and the Burden coming on. DJ Moore's kind of sliding out of favor. The tight ends are splitting. So like, is this like a spot where you would just skinny stack it, or would you find the double stack there?
Yeah, I built a Komet and Rome Odunze because it looks like Colston Loveland will miss this week, and the Titans are part of this offense. And so I built a Komet plus Rome Odunze stack this morning, just messing around with things. I think that's viable. But yeah, Rome is obviously the one that stands out. I think the larger the tournament field, the more risk you might be willing to take on in terms of going a different direction in how you're stacking this one. But it's a Ben Johnson offense, right? It's similar to a Josh McDaniels offense in that or a Shane Steichen offense. Part of what they do is keep the defense off balance by spreading it around to a bunch of different guys, which is great for that offense in real life, but not great for us in DFS. And so, I definitely see that. The Lions are the same way, right? It's like, yeah, they can put up a bunch of points, but is anybody at their price tags putting up the type of score you had to have? So Rome Odunze is pretty clearly the number one. And as we saw last week, that might not even always mean a ton of targets. Now, Caleb threw it 28 times. Rome had 7 targets. So that's, still pretty good rate stats there. But I definitely think that Rome is the guy to stack here. And then you can mix and match other guys and just say, look, we're trying to win tournaments, right? If we get it wrong, we get it wrong. But the larger the tournament field, the more risk we can take on and trying to add that extra piece to the stack.
One name I just got to mention before we move on to running back, just because he was, I believe, the highest scoring quarterback on the slate last week. Obviously, Jalen Hurts. The Eagles finally get pushed in the second half by the Rams. He throws 3 touchdowns, 1 to each of those guys. Ends up having a really solid week. Thoughts about Jalen Hurts on the road versus Tampa?
Yeah, I think I will probably get my Hurts exposure through A.J. Brown, but Hurts isn't totally off my list. So what I like about this spot is They finally got aggressive last week, right? And then Hurts and AJ Brown they got aggressive because they had to, but Hurts and AJ Brown both publicly, vocally after the game were saying, like, we need to do this more, right? Like, we have to tap into this style of play. And then you have a Buccaneers team that A, can put up points, and B, teams typically can't run against them. So I think it sets up well for the Eagles to be a little bit more aggressive than they typically are. What's interesting about AJ Brown, people tend to not feel comfortable playing him because it's so difficult to predict. In the low-end games, the scoring is so low. But he's gone for 4X or better. Going back to the start of last year, he's played 16 games in the regular season. He's gone for 4X or better his salary over 31% of the time, which is actually like tremendous, right? Typically we get 20 to 25%. And if you really look, a lot of players like 18%, even 15%. And then the guys who hit like the 18 to 15%, the reason they're priced where they're priced is because when they hit, they typically hit like really high. But AJ Brown can do that as well, right? So typically if you have a guy who hits this consistently, it's because it's like, yeah, but it's not huge scores, right? But AJ Brown can hit for those huge scores too. And so I'm willing to take the downside on AJ Brown, especially in a spot like this, because again, we're trying to win tournaments. If he puts up 7 points versus 14 points, there's not a material difference in the amount of money I'm going to be making. Maybe I'm able to double up my money on that roster if he puts up 14 points, and I'm out of the money if he puts up 7. But I'm looking for the 27-pointer, the 30-pointer, the 32-pointer, and I think that's in the cards here in this week.
All right, there you have it. Obviously, a few more quarterbacks there, but can't get to them all here because we got lots of ground to cover. We're going to move over to the running back position, I guess, because it feels a little different this week. I feel like normally we kick this off and it's like, you got to pay up for your running backs. You know, there's not a ton of good value. I mean, this week we get Omarion Hampton, who's now stepping into a pretty big role with no Najee. He's only 5,900, and Cam Skattebo in the same game. You mentioned the fun theme of the rookie takeover there. He's 5,500. Let's just start there on the value end. Are either of those prices intriguing to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is there's been a lot of people citing how many touches Omarion Hampton had, or how many his snap share, his touches after Najee went down. Well, Hassan Haskins was the number 3 back. Kamani Vidal is actually the number 3 back, but he's inactive because they had Haskins up for special teams, right? So Kamani Vidal will be active this week. He'll get some touches, and it's Greg Roman. So you can't totally trust that Omarion Hampton's going to have the workload we're going to expect him to have. How frequently do we see the backup running back step into the lead role? Everybody plays them, and then it's like, oh, they didn't get as many touches as we expected them to get. So I think that there's that risk here. At the same time, Omarion Hampton's a very good running back on a team that is generally good at running the ball, even though they haven't looked as great this year as they typically do, against a Giants team that has gotten lit up on the ground this year. And so totally fine with this play. Totally fine with the Cam Skattebo play, because it's a spot where, again, they're turning this, well, first off, we're playing PPR, right? We know that he's going to be involved in the passing attack. And then they're turning this offense over to Jackson Dart and Skattebo in the same week. So we have this opportunity for this offense to look different, for them to kind of have some extra juice. And what I like about this is typically if you had 2 guys stepping in on the same week, all the ownership would flock. We just see so many rosters with these 2 guys together. But since they're in a game against each other, and people don't typically have that level of comfort of playing 2 running backs in the same game, it could lower the ownership. It definitely will lower it somewhat from where it would be if these 2 were like in completely different games, right? And not to say that nobody's going to have these 2 together. People will, but it won't be as high owned, this combo, as it would have been if these 2 were in different games. And so I like that as well. And yeah, I think both of them are very sharp plays, and they're not the only sharp plays down here. You know, like Kyron Williams, I think, has been kind of forgotten about in this game where we expect points to be scored. And there's, Quinshon Judkins, horrible matchup, horrible game environment, but there's some juice there. And then the guy I was kind of alluding to earlier with the Drake May stuff, I think that we can actually take a swing on Travion Henderson this week. If we're trying to win tournaments, we can take a swing on Travion Henderson this week. And so there's this, there was a, whatever year it was, 2014, when, who was the running back? Jonas Gray. When Jonas Gray ran for 200 plus yards and 3 touchdowns against the Colts, like that was a week where obviously, growing up in New England, being attuned to the Patriots, but it was like the way that the Colts played defense, the way that the Patriots rotated their backs and played offense. Like I had a very clear vision that week, and it wrote him up in my Roto Grinders article that week, like play Jonas Gray this week, right? Because it's just like, sometimes you can see these spots where it's like, this is going to lean this way. Yes, it's risk. Yes, there's risk of getting 0 points, but we're trying to win tournaments. So what I see here is I don't think the Patriots turn the backfield over to Travion Henderson, but I think they do start him. And against Carolina, there is a world in which he's doing well early and they just keep riding him, And so I think that there's a tournament case to be made for a Drake May, TreVeyon Henderson stack where you're saying, I don't know where the passes are going to go, but I know TreVeyon Henderson will be involved in the pass game. It's a Josh McDaniels offense. There's going to be schemed work to the running backs, wheel routes for TreVeyon Henderson, screen plays for TreVeyon Henderson. And so there's a chance for the double up touchdown, but also let's just get the touchdowns. If the Patriots score 4 touchdowns, you have Drake May, you have TreVeyon Henderson, and TreVeyon Henderson seizes this backfield. So I think that's, we're looking at right now early ownership at 3.2% on TreVeyon Henderson. So I think that the risk reward is there to make it plus EV. Like we'd make money over time on this. Again, he's 3.2% for a reason. It's because we don't have clarity. But not having clarity actually helps us because the moment we have clarity, people flock to it, and they probably flock to it too heavily. The fact that we don't have clarity means that we're going to get low ownership. And I do think that we can just read the tea leaves and say, what's likeliest to happen here? That's actually what's likeliest to happen is that they give them the first crack at things. And if they do, then, and if any of you weren't paying attention last week, that's because Ramondre Stevenson fumbled, 2 times? And Antonio Gibson also fumbled. And so it makes sense for them to give the ball to TreVeyon Henderson, who never lost a fumble in college. And let's see what he can do in this spot. So if he does well early, I could see him just continuing to get the touches, get 18, 20 touches in this game.
Well, I like that analysis. Unfortunately, we did lose Star Tours, who has now ascended per his comment. If JM says May Henderson, I will ascend. So we'll see you up there in the stars. Very appropriate with your name there, Mr. Tours. How about at the high end here, JM? I'll kind of lump all these guys together and you maybe tier them out for me. CMC, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan, James Cook, Gibbs, and Barkley. I'll put those guys up there.
Yeah, I've got everything in ownership pulled up. So let me pull this up on my on the DraftKings app so I can kind of see these guys. I think CMC at the top just because of the targets and his involvement in the pass game. And it's pretty easy to, connect the dots on this. Still no Kittle. We don't know about Juwan Jennings, still no Ayuk. And so how do you move the ball? You're going to throw the ball to Christian McCaffrey. And so I tallied up, we can look at it right here, but I tallied up in my notes this week, like what he's put up just through the air, right? That's 18.8, that's 17.2 with the touchdown, that's 16.3. I mean, that's a 6K wide receiver, right? Just through the air, and then he gets the rushing work, and he still only has 1 touchdown on the year, right? So I think CMC is the guy where you have the highest floor, the highest ceiling. I don't want to overreact to early season stuff. This Atlanta offense, it was clearly Penix's worst game of his career, but it was so bad that it's kind of pushed me off a little bit, But I do think that Bijan Robinson is probably next in this group of he has had such a high hit rate of 20 plus point games. So let's see, I think it was 9 out of 12 heading into last week. So, or maybe it was 9 out of his last 12 last season. So that would be, he's at 11 out of his last 15 games. He's cracked 20 DraftKings points. Somebody could correct me on that if I'm wrong, but somewhere in that range, right? Since they really started emphasizing him in the Zach Robinson offense. And so I think that Bijan, just from a standpoint of how he's used, he's probably next in this group for me. And then any of these other guys can hit, right? I don't love the matchup for Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor to me is we should look at him the same way as Derrick Henry, which means there's certain matchups where there's a high probability that he's going to hit. And then look at this last week, right? I mean, week 1, high probability Miami. I was all over him against Miami. I had a lot less Jonathan Taylor the last 2 weeks. Actually, last week was kind of in between, but against Denver, I wasn't on him heavily. Against Tennessee, I went a little bit up on him, but there's certain matchups where you can see, okay, Jonathan Taylor's likelier to hit in this spot, but also same as Derrick Henry, there will be games where the matchup looks bad and he still hits. And so Jonathan Taylor's one of these guys. He's never off the list, but he's not highlighted for me this week. Same thing with Jahmyr Gibbs against this tremendous Cleveland defense. And then Saquon, it's interesting because it's so hard to run against the Bucs and teams don't typically try it. But I do think if there's one team that could make it happen, it's the Eagles, right? So, Saquon had 84 yards against them last year, but he had a 59-yard run in there. And so the rest of it was 2.7. It was 9 carries for 27 yards. It was or 24 yards, something like that. It was 2.7 yards a carry, somewhere in that range. And that's really what you're hoping for is you get the big play from Saquon. But when I think about who could put up, 30, 33, 35 points, I think CMC is first in line. And then these other 4 are a step below with Bijan at the top of that group.
let's see here. We've covered a lot of the top plays with that grouping. I mean, I'll toss out, maybe a couple other sleepers here. Like, are things ever going to change for Ashton Jeanty? Are we going to get the full snap share here? Bucky Irving, a pretty depleted Bucs team that will have to lean on the ground game. Those two and any other interesting names that jump out to you?
Yeah, you had mentioned James Cook, and I he wasn't on my screen when I looked at these high price guys. So I think that, his actual snap share hasn't jumped that much. He has like a, 45% in a blowout. He has a 55% and then a 60% or 66%, but which is unusual for him. But the touches are up, right? So since they paid him, they're like, hey, let's keep giving him more touches. And so, I think that James Cook is definitely a really interesting and sharp play here. Another guy who I was surprised to see the ownership a little bit higher, because he's somebody who I had a lot of edge last year, and similar to the A.J. Brown thing, like people didn't want to play him because his floor was lower than the other running backs priced around him, but he could hit at the same level as those other running backs, at the same rate as those other running backs, and at lower ownership. So it looks like because of the touches, ownership is up, but I still like this spot for him. Bucky Irving, I continue to kind of hammer this drum that he hasn't posted the types of scores that people perceive him having posted. And so I continue to be fine with letting other people chase him at, this elevated price tag. I think he's a tremendous player. I think that there's a chance he puts up 25 plus points, but the chance of him putting up like a score where I'm like, oh God, why didn't I play Bucky Irving? I couldn't win without him, to me are really low. And there's this range of, I always use the old Keenan Allen example, right? It's like the players who are almost never going to bury you for not having played them, but also they're always putting up solid scores. And so you can be like, yeah, like you can justify that type of play. Bucky Irving hasn't even been in that category of always putting up really solid scores. And so even to start this year, we see this 14, 16, 13, or 14, 18, 13. And so it's like, he's going to have some of these 25 pointers, some of these 28 pointers, but is he going to have 35 pointers? Like probably not, and probably not in this spot against Philly. So yeah, he's a guy I'm fine leaving alone. Ashton Jeanty, I just haven't, I mean, I know it's easy to say this. I just haven't liked the way he's looked. And obviously, like we've all seen the numbers about, yards before contact. It's like, negative yards before contact. Some of that is on the running back, but also obviously you can't have negative yards before contact without the offensive line doing a really poor job. So a nice matchup, a nice setup. I don't know that I'm scared. Watching my words as I say this out loud, trying to think through it. I don't know that I'm scared of like an Ashton Jeanty 30-pointer. And I say it like that because every time I kind of go past him in practice builds, I'm like, but am I scared of a 30-pointer? A
little fear, it sounds like.
A little bit. There's enough fear that like if you want to play him, I'm not like, oh, no, that's a bad play. It's definitely a fine play. I think he's not for me this week, but I could definitely see that coming back to bite me. That's one that I could see it coming back to bite me.
Yeah, let's see. We could do real quick on the big dog King Henry. I assume kind of similar analysis to the Jonathan Taylor type thing that you were saying, just a little cheaper and a little less confidence in the play. Yeah,
and doesn't have not that JT has a huge pass game role, but there's some pass game role there. That for Derrick Henry, the passes are kind of like, oh God, like I got to get rid of this ball. There's Derrick Henry. Let's throw it to him. So yeah, the Derrick Henry one, I'll never argue against like a Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry, but it's not a spot where I'm going to him.
Yep. And I'll say here, obviously we try to cover all the positions. We can't go through every single player. That's what 1 week season exists for, whether going through the NFL Edge with all the game by game breakdowns to get the team's thoughts on that, or of course the scroll with all of the, tournament angles, jams, final thoughts, all of that good stuff is all on 1 week season. You can always get 20% off your DFS and Inner Circle subs with promo code Pete. Jam, anything I'm forgetting? I do see right here $1 DFS pass if people want to check this out this week.
Yeah, and the promo code Pete takes 20% off that. So you could save another 20 cents.
Oh, there you go.
You can get in for 80 cents this week. Honestly, like we're doing stuff like this because like I always say, right? The site's not for everyone because we're not the conventional DFS site that's just providing picks. We do have my player pool, Sonic's MME pool. We have Mike's player pool. We have Pappy's player pool, but we're also like heavily focused on talking about the strategy and theory of DFS because it's rare that picks win a tournament. It's more about how you're putting those together, how you're thinking about strategy, how you're thinking about roster construction. So we always try to get as many people in the door as we can. And that's because we think that the people who the site resonates with, like maybe don't play a bankroll where you're going to pay $229 for a DFS sub, but maybe later in the year you'll hop in for $79 or $59 or whatever it is, because the price does drop throughout the season. And then you can get that access right now and see if this is a fit for you. And then if it's not, you're risking $1.80 in this case. So yeah, I want to encourage you guys, if you haven't checked out OWS, or if you have in the past, you're like, yeah, I like the site, I'm not going to pay for a full sub. This is a good week to just hop back in on that $1 week pass. And there's no code. It's just you go to the week pass and it's just $1 this week. And so you can use the promo code Pete and take another 20% off that. Really get yourself a steal.
There you go. 80 cents. Look at that. And here you can see a little bullet list of everything you can get for that. You can also include all the showdowns. We're going to have obviously the game tomorrow in Dublin. I actually just saw Jalen Warren just popped up with a Q tag for those of you playing Showdown early tomorrow morning. But all the good stuff with JM's Journal, Player Grid, Mike's Player Grid, FanDuel stuff, all that good stuff over on 1 week season. Promo code Pete, 80 cents to check out the site with that promo. There you go. Take advantage of it. All right, we're going to head over to wide receiver. Now, I mean, I think we finally reached a consensus. You know, I look around everywhere. It doesn't matter if we're talking Underdog, DraftKings, everywhere. Puka Nacua is the guy now. He's as close to a lock as we have. How far do you go with this? Are you starting every lineup with Puka, or is there room to get creative and fade him?
Well, I think we have to realize what his ownership is going to look like this week, right? Because we have these cheap running backs, we have cheap quarterbacks, we have some affordable wide receivers. So it's very easy to fit Puka this week. Yeah, you know, we've seen a 3-game sample of him putting up, you know, like 25 plus DraftKings points. So 3-game sample, you look through the game logs and it's like, this is great. This is never going to change. It'll change. There will be weeks where he's below this. But last year, it was consistently 17, 19, 20, 21, 22 points, right? And now it's consistently in the 25, 26, 27 point range. It would make sense for a guy in his third year in a great offense with now Devontae Adams opposite him to step that up even further. Really curious about what news we're going to get today on the Devontae Adams hamstring situation. Yeah. Like if he plays, I think that kind of makes a difference in a couple ways. Like Puka gets more touches and targets, but also you don't have Devontae taking things away from him. So we'll have to figure out how to sort through that. But no, I mean, I think that Puka is a very sharp play. I think that you can put him in kind of that CMC category insofar as he's a guy who is probably not going to wreck your roster most weeks. And you go through CMC's game logs from healthy seasons, there are still like the 12 and 14 point games in there, but it's that he's hitting 20 plus so frequently. And on a week where salary isn't prohibitive to get to Puka, it just makes sense to say, yeah, like let's consider him in my player pool. Am I starting every roster with him? No, because I always want to have that flexibility to think through like holistically what a roster looks like. But I'm also not going out of my way to quote fade him on roster. I'm like, I'm going to make sure I don't play Puka on this roster. So I think the Puka is a very sharp play this week. I think he's going to be owned. And so he's not going to win you a tournament, but he could be a guy that you had to have in order to compete in the tournament. You know, he only put up one elite score last year, and it was the game against the Bills, 42-44 game. So we're really looking for that type of game for an elite score. Most of the time, Puka is not going to bury you for not having played him, just the nature of how he's used. And so, I'm not really concerned on rosters that don't have him, but I'm very happy to have him where I can get him. And I also think that there's a chance that this game plays to the upside, not 42-44 upside, but there's a chance it plays to the upside enough that we could get an actual tournament winner. It's a slim chance with Puka, but it's in the cards for sure.
We've kind of hit on some of the guys on the top end here. A little love for AJ Brown, obviously mentioning Rome tied with Caleb. Let's talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown. We haven't talked about the Lions-Browns game yet. They're back home here. 2 weeks ago, Amon-Ra exploded for the 42 points. Came back down to earth, which for him is still, 20 points on Monday Night Football there. Thoughts on him and just, I guess, this overall spot for the Lions?
Yeah, well, I always want to think about how these coaches are going to attack these games. I think it's a huge edge for us. It's something that projection systems can't account for, right? So that's how we were able to be on the Lions a couple of weeks ago, was recognizing not just the matchup, but how Dan Campbell is going to handle this game if they have a lead. So typically these coaches like Dan Campbell, we talked about this last week with Todd Bowles and this Bucs team that loves to be aggressive and they love to exert their dominance over another team when they have that opportunity to do so. Well, last week the Bucs were playing the Jets, right? So a non-conference opponent, not a rival, like no clear reason for them to take a lead and say, hey, like let's just keep our foot on the gas. Let's keep pouring on the points. And so a game against Cleveland, really the number one defense in the NFL. I think people, if you're not paying close attention, you can get fooled by how many points Baltimore put up against them. But that was a bunch of short fields, turnovers, second half type stuff. Number one in the NFL in yards allowed, I think still. and pretty clearly like the scariest defense in the NFL at this point. And they've added pieces from, where they obviously last year they weren't the same, but 2 years ago they were one of the top defenses. They've added pieces since then. Schlesinger, Mason Graham, like this looks like a really tremendous defense. So to me, I think that the way the Lions approach this is there's a strategic component, and they don't want to be as strategic as the Packers were last week, right? Where the Packers are like, this defense we're playing is tremendous. We don't need to take risks because their offense can't score points against us, right? Like we've got 10, let's just keep being smart. And then, Jordan Love makes one mistake and it's a 10-point game and the Browns are able to come back from that. I guess it was a 3-point or a 7-point game at that point. But, and so I think that the Lions aren't going to be as cautious as the Packers, but there is that component of it's not a division opponent. It's not another top team in the NFC. It's a team that they see once every 4 years, and it's a team with a great defense, right? So I do think that the Lions will try to take control of this game and then not overextend themselves, not position the Browns to capitalize on a mistake and get back into this game. So it's harder for me to see Amon-Ra St. Brown putting up 35 or 40. Like he usually does that in shootouts or in games where the Lions are just trying to exert their will over another team. So, a lot of man coverage. It's a good matchup for him. I think he'll do well in this spot. I think you got a good shot at getting those, 18, 20, 22 points. Harder for me to see him putting up 30 plus where you really needed him this week. And so for me, it's not a risk I need to take on because I don't think the reward is high enough in terms of how it's likely to play out.
Let's head down to the 5K range and talk about some guys that look like values that are going to catch some ownership. And I would say, from having done this show with you over the years, this isn't typically your style of player, the type of players you love, but Chris Olave, Jakobi Meyers, Keenan Allen, Drake London, those guys all in the 5K range, projecting decently. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah. So first time I was actually thinking as I was finishing up that last, I know that my style, some people like it, some people don't, right? Where I'll talk and kind of work through thoughts out loud. But I think one of the things that if you're watching this, that you could take from this is it should be less about, oh, JM said this about this player, and more about like that blueprint of how we're thinking through plays. And so when we talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, instead of thinking he's going to have a good game, he's going to have a bad game, we're thinking through what his range of outcomes is, why that's his range of outcomes, what the reward is in taking him, and what the risk is in taking him. And so whether you like, if you're watching this, you haven't tuned out, maybe you hate watch this, but most of you, or you love Pete so much that you just keep watching it. But I would imagine most of you are still watching this. You have some level of appreciation for the way that I'm approaching things. But I want to encourage you to really use that not as a way to say, hey, these are the good plays, these are the bad plays, but more as a blueprint of how we want to think through plays, because you might come to a different conclusion than me. But as long as we're thinking through these plays, over time, we're coming up with good thoughts. Jakobi is my favorite one of the bunch down here because, he can, we think of him as like a slot guy, a short route guy, but, he has a lot of intermediate to his game. And so, yeah, like in this price range, I honestly, I'm going to prefer a guy like Quentin Johnston, a guy like Ricky Pearsall, like the guys who have the downfield ability and can put up 130 yards on 6 catches, right? Because you need less to go right in order to have the tournament winning score, right? And there's the tendency, as we talk about over time, the comfort of like, well, this guy gets a lot of targets, so I want to play him because he's not going to wreck my roster. But it's like, how often is he going to win you a tournament? We have to account for that. But I do think that Jakobi Meyers, the targets are going to be there. And he's a sharp play, especially if you're playing to this game environment here, where you think the Bears are going to do well. Jakobi fits really well in that. And then honestly, all these guys like Keenan Allen, I've preached against him for so long because he was 7,300, 7,800, and people would play him because he always got 17 to 22 points. And it's like, that's nice. Take your 17 to 22 points, but you're not winning tournaments with him, except for the rare game environment where he's getting 15 plus targets. We can usually see those coming. But now he's down here at 5,300. And yeah, the touchdown regression is going to hit. He's not going to keep putting up a touchdown every game. And then you got a 12-pointer instead of an 18-pointer. But I think he's a totally fine play here. And then Chris Olave, I mean, the targets are so immense that I had him in my tier 1 wide receivers originally in the player grid. I bumped him down to tier 2 just because it's harder to see him hitting the big play. But what I like about this spot is, sometimes you do, especially in smaller field tournaments, just take the floor points, right? Like we did it last week with the Olave, Juwan Johnson, or Rashid Shaheed, Juwan Johnson stack, where it's like, it's not winning you a tournament, but you're getting these points. and then you can build around this. And so I feel that way with Olave. And, the Bills do two things on defense. One, they try to take away what you want to do in terms of scheme, right? So if you're playing the Dolphins, they're like, hey, we're going to close the middle of the field, force you to work the perimeter. The other thing that the Bills do is they kind of like the old Belichick model. McDermott's like, look, if you have to march the field over and over again, you're going to make a mistake. Well, that's literally what the Saints are trying to do is just march the field over and over again. It's all quick, short passing, huge volume, no huddle, fastest pace of play in the NFL. And we saw them last week against the Seahawks. There was a drive where it was like false start and then a play and then another false start, another drive that had a couple holding penalties on it. So playing on the road in these loud game environments, like the Bills aren't going to say like, all right, let's throw everything in the line of scrimmage, take away this short passing, force them to win over the top. Why would you do that? You're going to say like, all right, you guys want to try to march the field against us? Cool. See if you can do that over and over again without making mistakes. And so these passes are going to be open to Olave throughout the game. I think that we see another double-digit target game. We see a lot of easy catches for him. Do we see the yards? Probably not. But all it takes is one broken play, right? Like I was saying this to the guys on OWS, Mike and Hilo and Zanimir last week. We were talking about JSN, and it was like, I was saying, yeah, but like in week 2, without his whatever it was, 40, 50-yard play, like I see a guy who's got, whatever it was, 7 catches for 60 yards, But that's the thing with Olave is that one play is in there. Like that's within the realm of possibilities where all of a sudden this 10 catches for 57 yards, you had one more 40-yarder and you're sitting up there close to 100. And so, I think that Olave is a sharp way to go this week as well. And totally don't mind him as a guy who just layer in and say, I know I'm getting these points. It's probably under 20, but there are pathways to getting 22, 25, 27. And he's not going to kill your roster because he's going to get the targets. The Bills are going to let him get these targets in the way they're likely to play this game. And so, I like the spot for him.
It seems like pretty hard to find some value under 5K this week. I feel like I used to do under 4K, and then I got to loosen it up to 5K. You mentioned Tyquan Thornton a little bit earlier. Someone in the chat getting excited for Luther Burden here. Anyone cheap if people are trying to save money at wide receiver? Yeah,
I think Adonai Mitchell is going to, I have to imagine he's going to get steamed up throughout this week a little bit. But he's, all right, let's look at it like this. Alec Pierce is, I don't know what he is, 4,400, 4,700, something like that, right? Like Adonai Mitchell's honestly probably a little bit better than Alec Pierce, and he's stepping into the Alec Pierce role, assuming that Pierce misses with the concussion this week, and he's 3,100. So it's just value right there. But when Adonai Mitchell's on the field, he commands targets. It's like over a 30% target rate when he's on the field, and last year it was similar. When he's on the field, he commands targets. And when Alec Pierce is out, Adonai Mitchell is on the field all the time. So, when you're talking about how do we save salary, how do we fit things in? Obviously, we've got the running backs to save a salary. But there are components of like, if you can get the 15 to 20 pointer from the cheap guy, now all of a sudden you've opened up salary to add 2 high-priced wide receivers or to go with, a James Cook plus a Nico plus a Puka, something like that, and open things up with an AD Mitchell. And so, I actually really like this play this week because if he puts up the 5 to 7 to 9 points, it doesn't kill you at its price tag because of what it opens up elsewhere on your roster. But we play out the slate 100 times, he might have 5, 7, 8, even 10 games where he's putting up 15, 18, 20 points in this spot.
Is there anything we haven't really touched on the Niners other than CMC? Even Pearsall has the Q tag right now, I believe. Juwan Jennings seemed like he was kind of on the bad side of his Q tag. There's clearly targets up for grabs here. Anything we can do with the pass catchers? Yeah.
If Juwan Jennings plays and is healthy, he's a tier 1 play for me. So if you've never used OWS, my player grid, I've got blue chips, light blue chips, and then bonus plays. And so, you can kind of get a sense of where that goes. Right? Blue chips is like, these guys are highly unlikely to hurt you. They're highly likely to help you. Light blue chips is like, not quite as likely, but they're still right up there. And then the bonus is kind of that next category. And there I have tier 1 and tier 2. And this is like tier 1 plus light blue plus blue chips is kind of my tighter player pool. So to me, Juwan Jennings is tier 1 bonus for me if he's healthy and playing. And then Pearsall kind of drops to tier 2 because he doesn't have the volume of targets, but he still has the upside. And then if Juwan Jennings is out, Pearsall is a tier 1 for me because the volume of targets is going to be there and he's got the upside. So Pearsall, like with no Juwan Jennings, is a 7K player, and we're still getting him down here at 5,700. Jags defense has looked good, but they've also played Bryce Young and Jake Browning, and a Texans offense that's quite literally like 31st or 32nd in the league right now in terms of like comprehensive offensive scheme and execution and their ability to handle pressure and all that. So, the Jags, I think the Jags defense is good, but not great. And so this is a spot where, and even with that, they've been hit by wide receivers so far this season, wide receivers who can work downfield. So I think Pearsall's a really sharp play if Juwan Jennings misses this week, and I'll be pretty heavy on him in this spot.
Before we move on to tight end, any other wide receivers you want to mention that I didn't ask you about? Obviously a big player pool here, but anyone else stand out to you that we didn't hit on?
Oh, I'm sure plenty, but we'll hit on that in the player grid. I think we hit on a lot of the core stuff that we need to hit on in this space.
Yeah, I'll just do one more for you here because everyone's like, what's going on with Brian Thomas Jr.? No games over 10 points yet this year. Is this a fluke, or is this kind of a trend we should expect to continue?
No, I mean, he's not going to stay under 10 points all season. Like I said it 2 weeks ago, that Brian Thomas Jr. is an 8K wide receiver trapped with the quarterback who's keeping him, in like the 6K range. But he is a 6K wide receiver, which these scores, 9, 8.9, 7.5, that's a guy who should be priced like 4,200, 4,500. And so, no, like he's not going to continue to produce like this, but he is probably going to continue to produce like a 6K wide receiver, which means a guy who puts up 3 or 4 games this year of like 22 to 25 points. Maybe he gets a 29, 30 pointer in there. Now, it's a new offense. Things could change, right? Things could start clicking. I think we'll see signs before it totally comes around. Like, you can look at the advanced stats, right? I think it was like the second highest inaccurate throw rate in the NFL belongs to Trevor Lawrence. There's some other things like that. But also just watching all the games and grading the games, you're just like, what's wrong with this guy? There's just so many places where Trevor Lawrence is missing reads, or where you watch a quarterback, Daniel Jones, like of all people, right? And he's throwing these passes where you've got a safety come in and a cornerback behind him, and he's throwing it A, where only his guy can catch it, and B, where the guy's not going to take a hit, right? Perfect ball placement consistently. And Trevor Lawrence is consistently like bad ball placement, which at the NFL level, guys are rarely open. You're typically throwing into small windows in zone coverage or into guys, tight man coverage where it's pretty sticky, and you got to get the ball in the right place. And he's not doing that. So that like being 2 yards off on the ball placement makes a huge difference. And that keeps happening. So we've talked about this, right? Like Brian Thomas Jr.'s blow up last year all came with Mac Jones. He had like one strong game with Trevor Lawrence last year. Mac Jones steps in, and BTJ, like 6 weeks in a row, he's hitting. And it just still hasn't clicked with Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence just doesn't look totally right yet. So I'm fine taking swings on him. Like I'm playing single entry 3 max this week. He's not in my player pool, but it's not going to shock me if he puts up 25 or something like that. But in terms of the math, like it doesn't benefit me in from an expected value standpoint to try to guess on when it happens, because there's plenty of places that are high probability and I can get similar scores. If I lose because Brian Thomas Jr. puts up 35, and there was no way for me to see that coming, I'm fine with that. Like, because over time, just trying to guess on things like that is going to lose us money. I want to go to the place where we can really see what's coming down the pipeline and how this player has a big game.
All right, let's head over to tight ends. I say when we build the lineup, it's everybody's favorite part of the show. This is JM's least favorite part of the show, historically, talking tight ends. I mean, at the top, no Trey McBride played last night. We do get Brock Bowers. Kind of curious on your thoughts with him and what's going on. Tyler Warren looks like a pretty good value. And then I think Hunter Henry is going to be fairly popular, obviously went nuts last week. So let's start with those 3 guys at the high end.
Yeah, shout out to you for playing Hunter Henry. I was looking at him last week, and I went back through his game logs last season, and it was like, man, he has these 20-plus point games in there. He had 2 of them last year. I think it was 2 of them last year, pretty early in the season, then none of them the rest of the year, right? And so it's not like Hunter Henry's role suddenly changed this last week, and he did something we've never seen before. We've seen him do it, right? The reason I didn't end up putting him in my player pool, even my MME pool, was because it was like, I can't predict where the blow-up's going to come. And I feel like there are other places where I feel higher confidence, right? So he ends up having the blow-up game, but it was like, I don't know that it's necessarily predictable, and I don't know that just because he did it last week, it carries over to this week, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Won't surprise me if he hits. I just don't think that he doesn't stand out on paper as a clearly sharp play, and he's going to be higher owned. So strategically, I don't mind mostly avoiding him, but maybe I'll have him in a Drake May stack or something. Bowers, they're saying he's 100% healthy or practicing fully. And so the knee was very clearly slowing him down in week 2. It didn't look as bad in week 3, but the production just hasn't been there, and it's a new quarterback and it's a new system. So there are things to think about in that regard. But realistically, like his talent will rise to the top at some point. He's going to have these big games. So yeah, I'm fine with Bowers. I think at 5,800 compared to 5,800 wide receivers, like that's pretty fair value for Brock Bowers. So especially at a thin position where if he hits, most other players aren't. And yeah, I think Tyler Warren, again, just a clearly sharp play in a game where points are going to have to be scored. The Colts are going to have to stay aggressive, and kind of a disappointing game last week, but he's very much involved in this offense. He's going to stay involved in that way.
If you were to give us one value tight end, I'll throw a few names at you: Njoku, Juwan Johnson, Brenton Strange, Zach Ertz, Kyle Pitts. Anything stand out to you there?
Yeah, no, nothing stands out. I like the Njoku angle because the targets are still there. The role is still there. Like people have talked, because he hasn't performed, it's easy to like paint by numbers and be like, oh, Harold Fannin is eating into his, but realistically, like he's not eating into Njoku's snap share or the way that he's being used in this offense. They're kind of playing two different positions. So I think that he's still in a game where Cleveland's going to have to be throwing to score points. I think that he's still viable in this spot. And we're getting this, I was thinking last week, he is starting to look like a little bit slower on the field, which tends to happen with athletes as they get older. But no, I think he's very much in the mix. Kyle Pitts, I said last week that he's a guy that in MME, I'll probably continue to have 4% of him in my player pool every week, as long as he's cheap, because he can put up a 20-pointer. But 20-point is kind of the high end of his range, and most of the time he's not getting there. And then, like Brenton Strange is very clearly being used in this offense, but there's so many weapons that they have to choose amongst, and he hasn't topped 7 targets, so I don't know that we're expecting him to be just like heavily involved all of a sudden in this spot. And so and going against Fred Warner in this 49ers defense, so yeah, nothing really pops to me. I think Juwan Johnson's sharp in the same context as Olave. Like the targets are going to keep being there because they're going to play fast, they're going to throw the ball a lot, and they're probably going to have to throw the ball trailing the Bills in points here. So yeah, to me, Juwan Johnson and Njoku are probably the two that stand out to me the most. And it's thin down here, as it always is. And I think that a mistake that people make is being like, well, that's fine, let me save salary here. It's an ugly position, let me save salary and get 5 to 10 points. But like if Bowers puts up 25, you don't have a shot on that week, because you're so far behind at that position. If Tyler Warren puts up 22, 25. So I do think that going up to these guys, or getting the guys who you think can get you 15 with an outside shot at the big game, is kind of the way to go at the position.
All righty. Before we build a lineup, looks like we got almost 500 people watching live. Appreciate that. If you guys are new around here, please hit the subscribe button. JM and I do this show every single Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Immediately following this, we got the Bully the Sims show with the Run the Sims crew. Youdacao, NerdyTenor, 2 of the best DFS players in the world. We'll get their thoughts. And then after that, we have Off and On the Clock, which is for all the underdog strategy specific stuff. And if you're already subscribed, hit that like button for us while you guys are hanging out in the chat. But I think it's time to roll up our sleeves and get ready to build here. All right, JM, blank canvas here on DraftKings. Where are we starting?
All right, so I got a block for us. I've got some puke blocks that we could roll with this week. But I'm going to make people happy and go with something that everybody can get on board with, and that is a Puka Nacua plus Nico Collins stack.
Ooh.
And so there's some interesting thoughts here, which is this isn't going to be difficult to fit for a variety of roster constructions. And we're going to have salary to spend this week because people are going to be saving money at running back. And then you look and you're like, okay, well, do I really want, Mike Evans is out. Do I want Zay Flowers against Kansas City at 6,700? Do I want Emeka Ibuka against this good Philly defense where it's the first time we're seeing him kind of a featured role without Mike Evans, all the attention on him? Do I want Malik Neighbors against this great Chargers defense and Jackson Dart in his first start? Do I want Amon-Ra St. Brown against this great Cleveland defense where we don't think Cleveland can push this thing on the scoreboard? So I think people will just naturally be pushed up to these two. And it's not natural for people to double pay down at running back. Usually if somebody gets Skattebo or Marion Hampton, they're going to pay up for James Cook or CMC or Saquon or whoever else at that other running back position. But there will be people who go double pay down, and then they will naturally just have the salary to get up to this. So my thinking on this is essentially like Puka can put up 25 to 30. Nico can put up 25 to 35. Obviously, Puka can do that as well. But there's a timeline on which the 26 to 28 from Puka is like one of the better scores on the slate. Like maybe that's like the wide receiver 3 score. And then Nico puts up the wide receiver 1 score. And this is on 3%, 5%, 7% of rosters. And you're dead in the water if you don't have it. And so my thought is, because this is something that will naturally be, it's kind of the opposite of how we sometimes think, where sometimes it's like, oh, this is going to be popular, so how do I do something different? This is a spot where it's like, this combination is actually going to be somewhat popular. And I can very clearly see, I worked through the math in the journal this week, and it was like, probably about 7 or 8% of the time, these two hit together on the same week. I don't think it'll even be owned at 7 to 8%. So it's just naturally plus EV to be on it. But on top of that, it's one of these where it's like, because I can see the roster construction pathways to people being on this, I want to account for it on my builds. And so a portion of my builds this week is going to be like, let me just make sure that I start with this in order to say, if this is something you had to have, I have it, right? I don't like taking bad plays or mediocre plays where it's like, but everybody's going to be on it and it could hit. It's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. Over time, I'll make money not chasing those. But when it's a really good pairing like this and people are going to be on it, then I'm like, well, I want to make sure I'm aware that people will be on it. I want to account for it. So yeah, Puka and Nico as a starting point on this roster.
All right. I like it. Like you said, I think it'll be fairly unique as far as paying up twice there. So does this mean we are paying down at both running back spots, or not necessarily, maybe at least one pay down running back?
Yeah, so we can take a pay down, and we can start with Amari and Hampton at our pay down running back, because I think that just in terms of the matchup and the offense that he's in, we feel better about that than Skattebo. And then we can throw in AD Mitchell, because we can just kind of get a sense of what this does for a salary. So again, the way I look at AD Mitchell is, it's kind of like taking a guy at 4,400 or 4,700 who has like a Darnell Mooney, right? Where it's like, he's probably not putting up 25. He's probably not putting up 22, but he can. And when he's missing, he's probably going to put up, 7, 9, 12 points, somewhere in that range. And so getting him at 3,100 and allowing us to really open things up on the roster. And potentially, I've built rosters this week that had Puka and Nico and James Cook, so it opens this pathway to be able to say, hey, what can we do here to be even more different in this spot? Next thing we can do is let's throw in a defense, because on this roster, I just want to get a sense of salary. Texans are pretty clearly the top defense. And going away from them, when you get, the Patriots are solid, the Chargers are solid, the Bills are, not really on the Bills, because Rattler hasn't been making mistakes and the Bills don't really force mistakes. Detroit is solid, but that's all in the same price range. So then you're just trying to be different with a lesser defense. So let's start with the Texans here. And then if we want to do something different, we can. If we want to go cheap, we can. But Texans is a good place to start. And we see that leaves us with 5,500 per player, right? So a couple things that we can do. We can go cheap at tight end, which kind of trends us down toward continuing to have opportunity to pay up somewhere else. We could go to Daniel Jones at quarterback and pair him with AD Mitchell. Or we could go to one of our favorites, which would be a Mahomes, and then we decide, do we want to do Worthy, which costs a little more, or do we want to do Tyquan Thornton? Or we can go Caleb and just throw in Rome Odunze, and we know we're going to be paying down at that second running back spot, but that kind of starts pushing the buttons for us of what this is going to look like. So, Pete, any thoughts from you on where you would want to go next on this one?
Yeah, I was going to at least just confirm with Puka and Nico. I mean, we didn't talk about them, but Stafford and Stroud wouldn't really be in the player pool, just kind of playing the alpha games through the wide receivers.
Right. So on the Rams side, it was actually interesting discussions about this last week on, I think Reeves and Hilo talked about this, and then they on this. But because of how concentrated the Rams are, you can play Puka and Devontae Adams together and not play Stafford, because those two can both hit for tournament winners without Stafford hitting. He can throw for 275 yards and 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns. And these guys can both hit without him. And so especially playing one of these guys without him, fine. And then the Texans are quite literally the worst offense in the NFL right now. And so Nico is almost a stretch in that regard, but it's he's so good that he can do it. So yeah, to me, it's Nico and not Stroud. I don't think you need the stacking partner in this spot.
Okay. I think any of those ideas sound fun to me. I mean, we did Caleb in Rome last week, so maybe we mix it up a bit. Do you want to do some with Mahomes, or do you think a Dimes fits better? You could do a Dimes and Warren type thing. What do you think?
Yeah, let's go. So let's go Danny Dimes, or I should say Indiana Jones. Got a new nickname.
That's right.
there.
We've updated.
We'll get Indiana Jones. Let's throw in Tyler Warren. And what I actually want to do here, I built one of these rosters earlier in the week, is I actually want to throw in Kyren Williams as the running back. And what we're betting on here is this being a game that's like 38-34, right? This being a game where lots of points are scored, and we just need to be part of those points that are being scored. And then we can do something fun here where we could go like double tight end and go Brock Bowers, and we're covering both the tight ends that you could potentially have to have. And there is there's a timeline on which you actually had to have one or the other, like where both guys hit, and most people won't have both together. Or we could go Ricky Pearsall here as a guy who I really like if Juwan Jennings is out. And there's some other options that we could go with here as well. But we see the upside on this roster, right? Like Amari and Hampton can go for 25. Kyren can go for 25. Puka can go for 25 to 30. Nico can go for 35. AD Mitchell can go for 20 plus. Tyler Warren can go for 20 plus. Probably not at the same time as AD Mitchell, but if they do, you've got Daniel Jones. So you're accounting for the whole block. And then Pearsall can go for 30, right? So not to say that everything's going to hit together, but if it were to, our ceiling is tremendous. And I think a lot of times we see rosters where if everything hits together, the ceiling isn't that high because we're taking a lot of safe plays. And this is kind of even like a single entry, like a smaller single entry roster in that there's not a lot of holes in this. It's all sharp plays from like a floor ceiling perspective, but the ceiling is really high on all of it. And it's a pretty unique type of build.
One other thing too, and obviously there's going to be tons of late swap potential on this slate. Like 80% of this roster is playing in the late window. So like I was even just thinking through like a pivot, like say Juwan Jennings does end up playing on this lineup. You could do something like where you go Bowers at tight end, and then let's see, Juwan Jennings doesn't quite fit, so obviously you'd have to mess around with this a little bit more. But there were some little tweaks like that I think you could make depending on how some of that injury stuff shakes out as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like you get a little bit of information in the early slate, and then you get more information in terms of where things are going with health and all that, and make some late changes as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So as always, we give our usual caveat here. This is, an idea generating exercise, figuring out how pieces come together. And this one is fun because I feel like we haven't done a ton of like big game stacks on the year. And generally, like with the rushing quarterbacks, it's kind of like you don't necessarily want to force the game stacks, but with Dimes at 5,600 and then AD Mitchell at 3,100, like the opportunity cost with that stack is so low. Like you don't need, if you do the premium double stack with I guess it would be like the Eagles
Burrow
or
and Higgins and Chase or something. Yeah.
Like you just need insane nuclear stuff. Whereas like you said, AD Mitchell, if you get 15 points from him, or even Tyler Warren, you get 22, like that can easily pay off a double stack cost.
Yeah. And what I like about this one too is you're betting comprehensively on the game environment with Kyren, with Puka. You're saying lots of points are scored, and so if you get the sort of like 27-24 type game, you still have a shot at Daniel Jones plus AD Mitchell plus Tyler Warren salary wise being one of the better stacks you could play. But if you get that 38-34 game, then you have this spot where that might be one of the better raw point type stacks that you could play, and it's really cheap, which opens you up to a lot of upside on the rest of your roster. So. Pretty fun build here. And I think it's like some of the stuff like this week is in play, right? Where we can mess around with the way we're allocating salary to be a little bit different from the field and to do some fun things in that regard.
All right, JM, a pleasure as always walking through the slate. Like we mentioned, take advantage of that dollar pass at 1 week season. Use that promo code Pete and you can just feel
say
like
20 cents.
Really, 80 cents for the week. Promo code Pete over on 1 week season. JM and I will be back in the saddle next Friday at 1 p.m. So JM, we'll see you later. And up next, we got the Bully the Sim show with Youdacao and NerdyTenor. Until next time, JM. All right. Bully the Sims here. We got NerdyTenor fresh off of his 300K score. They say what happens when you win 300K is that the camera just starts getting closer and closer to you. Nerdy, how you doing here?
I'm all right. I'm not streaming from my usual nuclear bunker. I am away from home in Albany, New York. So this is my lovely Hilton hotel room we're featuring today.
Wow. So you're telling me that after you win 300K, you don't kind of call around and upgrade to the Ritz or the Four Seasons? What's going on?
Believe it or not, this is one of the nicer hotels in the area, so there's not a lot of great options. It's perfectly fine though.
So were you sweating that lineup last night, or was that something you like woke up to? How did that go down?
So, I'm here doing family business, but I'm by myself, so I didn't have a lot to do. So I'm just streaming some videos, and then they don't get the game here, and I didn't want to watch it on a tiny screen on my laptop. So I'm just streaming some videos, and at the end of the slate, I look, and I'm like, holy shit. The score wasn't final, and I'm on the East Coast now. I'm usually in Colorado. I'm like, well, shit, I have to wait and see if this is, if they finalize the score, because I never text my wife with the win until the number is finalized, because, we've heard all of the stories of, $1 million for a minute, and then, a correction happens, and it's happened. We know this has happened. So I ended up staying long. I didn't sleep very well, and then but yeah, I've got my celebratory Sour Patch Kid ready to go. I'm just living the life here.
Well, in the Discord, you said hookers and blow, or maybe that was Shady said that, but what you really meant was double trees and Sour Patch Kids is the reality. Okay,
pretty much.
In the comments there, though, it says you're supposed to thank me. Says
that's
Adam.
right. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah, shit buddy says
the projection.
Yes, it says his disclaimer. If you win, it was the projections, and credit should be given to me, Yuda, and Davis. That's actually, do you want to shout out Davis for this $300,000 score? Nerdy?
Sure, I'll shout out everybody. I mean, the funny thing is, I'm like not even at home at my full computer strength. I'm like, well, I still have to enter, So, but yeah, all of the projections get cooked in there. So it's been really fun. I'm not involved in making the projections, but someone congrats Davis.
For our audio listeners here, we do have the screenshot up. 300K. The lineup was Kyler Murray at captain, Sam Darnold, Marvin Harrison Jr., Zach Charbonnet, Jay Myers. I'm so out of the kicker loop that I don't even remember his first name. Jason Myers, and in Seahawks defense. Congratulations, Nerdy. And I believe what you said is if people sign up with Run the Sims, you use the Showdown tool and Sim tool, they too will also be guaranteed to win $300,000. Is that how that works?
Right, exactly right. Yeah, not financial advice. Don't do post.
There you go. Yuda, how you doing here? Back in the saddle for Bully the Sims. How was your week 3?
I'm good. I had my best week so far. Nice. Every take I gave on here was bad. So, use your late swap.
There. So what?
My sweat, it was basically having a lot of Vikings defense, or like disproportionately Vikings defense tied to Mason, right? Because I was talking about how like I kind of liked the pass game to like kind of bust Mason, but you have the scenario where, Browning, inexperienced, bad offensive line, confusing Vikings defense, right? Playing at home. So it kind of just snowballed. They couldn't do anything. Every time the Vikings got the ball, they were like at the Cincy, like 30. It was like correlating that. And then as far as early, I only really was a little high on Henry, but it was like 8% compared to like 4% of the field. But you kind of needed him because he separated a little bit. I talked down the Rams Eagles spot too, even. But I guess the nature of just the construction with like Puka being a pretty good value as far as price, he kind of brought in some of like the Hurts stacks. So that helped. But the real sweat I had, I think it was like on FanDuel, it was like Hurts. So like Hurts double, so Hurts, AJ, maybe Devontae, but it had like the Hunter Henry one off. Wow. Mason Kings. I think there was some snowflakes in there, so I couldn't get there. But the play that knocked me out was like the last scoring event of the slate. It was like the McBride touchdown.
Oh yeah. There was some scores charging there late.
I had McMillan. That's what it was.
Oh yeah. Are there, so for people who are just tuning in or new to this show, kind of the structure of what we're going to do here is talk through the slate through some slightly different lenses than we do with JM. Want to talk about, input volatility spots where we might be willing to bully the Sims, IKB stuff. Definitely want to get into some, favorite game environments and maybe contrarian stacks. Kind of some chalk diagnosis, stuff that we think is playable, or maybe the field is out ahead of their skis. And then we will kind of run the Sims literally and see where some of the lineups might line up with, Yuda's ball knowing take. So that is the agenda for today. But I think I wanted to start out with a macro topic here, Yuda. And you had mentioned talking about TD variance in mean regression as something that you're thinking about when you head into a slate. And I assume this comes from the fact that we now have a little sample size with 3 games, and the field might be overreacting to kind of touchdown variance early. Is that kind of where you're headed with this?
Right. There's like a difference, I guess, as far as skill goes and like reality between scoring when it happens, when it's via opportunity or if it's via touchdowns, which is kind of event driven. And it's so early that many might not be able to differentiate how the scoring shakes out. Like you see 20 on the game log, it's a little less meaningful if it's from 2 touchdowns rather than volume. So, play calling contributes to touchdowns just as much as player skill, unless it's like a really undeniable play, right? Like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts at the goal line, they're going to get the touchdown because it doesn't matter what you do, and they're going to call that play. But there's certain spots where like maybe the running back has a greater share of the touchdown so far than you can sustain, or like, the pass game and whatnot. So those are like, that's kind of like a minor edge that is certain to regress that isn't really counted.
So Nerdy, on that topic, I guess where my head goes is like, shouldn't good projections factor in that variance in regression, or like how do we, or how is it not efficiently priced in, or how do you take advantage of that from your perch?
I guess it comes down to knowing what your projection sources are doing, like how they're generated, which can be difficult. Different sites are more or less transparent about what they're doing, but I think it really comes down to how much recency they're using in their system, right? But even if you know exactly what they're doing, there's still another thing to consider, which is that, not every 13-point median projection is equivalent, right? Because there can be fragility in the projection where, we're just not really sure as a projection source what it's going to be, and we pick something plausible in the middle, but it's not really centered around that middle point. It's more that there's just it's a very wide range of outcomes. So just knowing as best you can how they got to the number, I think can be very useful.
So Yuda, do you have any examples heading into week 4? I guess it would be kind of over or underperformers, or things people might be over or under reacting to.
There's not like some like very obvious one. One you could argue is actually like Josh Allen. Buffalo, as far as like, I mean, they average like 35 points a game. So the sample of TDs is kind of high, but it's like, even going back to last year compared to historical, where James Cook starts accounting for a lot more of the team's touchdowns relative to throwing touchdowns. So even in the smaller sample, like I think James Cook has 4 rushing touchdowns. That would be pretty unsustainable at the rate where like Allen probably has like 4 or 5 passing touchdowns, especially when you factor like prior to last year, Allen was probably accounting for even more rushing touchdowns. I mean, once again, they score a lot in general. And Allen actually accounts for a lot of his team's touchdown, maybe as much as any QB out there. A good one would even be like Penix. Penix has like 1 throwing touchdown. They haven't scored too much, but
That's an interesting kind of example, right? Because I don't think no one's worried about Josh Allen, right? And his ability to get back in the, the green column as far as touchdowns. There is like legitimate worry about this Falcons offense. You have Dan Orlovsky going on and saying like the entire system needs to be overhauled. They said this week that Zach Robinson's going to come down to the booth so he can better communicate with Michael Penix. So are you kind of saying with this, like, hey, maybe this is just relax, like things are going to be fine? Or is there concern that this thing could completely fall apart?
With Penix?
Yeah.
It's certainly more of a relax, but I'm not really like looking at, when I speak on this, like how I think the offense environment is. It's that you just know the scoring is going to flatten out as far as how the touchdowns go over 18 games.
Gotcha.
But if we can go back to the Bills, because
I
do have more in general on that. I think like they're doing well. They're kind of cruising. They have the easiest schedule. Josh Allen, I looked at this historically. He kind of abuses these huge spreads, like where it's like low resistance matchups. He doesn't really dial back the aggression. Maybe they like play a little slower and he sits out these fourth quarters sometimes. But it doesn't actually really change the play call because he is the play call, right? Unless they're like choosing to run significantly higher, and they're kind of capped at that because I don't think they really want the load on James Cook early in the season. But given he is the offense, if you see like a 30 total there, he's accounting for like the offense anyway. It's not really a spot to be afraid of because they might blow them out. Because if they score, it's still Josh Allen in some form.
Nerdy, one thing I wanted to ask you about that, and I think Josh Allen ends up being a really good example for it. And I noticed last week, I was really into Drake May. I was really into Marcus Mariota. And when you're looking at Sims and stuff, some of these rushing quarterbacks that don't have really strong stacking partners, they're not popping in the Sims because the Sims are saying, hey, you're going to have to hit a 7-leg parlay instead of a 5-leg with this. So like, how do you think about that with Josh Allen, where there aren't super attractive stacking partners, but if you love the spot, how do you think about that from a lineup building perspective?
Well, I think it's worth thinking of some different scenarios. Like the one that occurs to me first is, Josh just, tears apart the defense that spreads the ball around so far and so wide and maybe runs one or two in that you don't have to stack him and he might just very well get there on his own. Like that's definitely in the range of outcomes. No one would be shocked by that result. So I think it often comes down to, and you see this in other teams too. I no great secret. I'm hardly a football expert, but this archetype of like you got a really good quarterback, but potentially a very diffuse set of targets. Now it gets exponentially harder the more potential targets he has to nail the right ones. If they go off, because the chance of it getting spread more just keeps increasing. So it can get to the point where maybe you don't stack in all of your constructions. Maybe you just say, I'm not going to worry about which receiver gets what here. It's a big enough slate that I can make it up somewhere else. Like I can hit the big playmaker on some other team. So that's where my mind goes first.
Yeah. Like you see the pricing on their pass catchers, it's pretty high. They're all maybe 5 to 1K higher than what a value pricing would have them. That makes Allen much lower owned than he's going to be, or than he should be, really, as far as like the odds that he's the optimal. And I'm sure there's many instances of his best receiver getting like 17 on DK and he has 40. So Allen with no stack is probably viable.
Yeah. And this, I know this is a DraftKings show, but this dynamic is like so much easier for me to think through on the underdog perspective too, where you only have 6 spots and you just play alpha Josh Allen because the price you're paying like dictates that he's going nuke in the ground game, which is going to lower the 90th, ceiling percentile outcomes for the other pass catchers. And we see like what won last week. It was Jalen Hurts naked with Hunter Henry because even though Dallas Goedert scores or AJ Brown scores, Devontae Smith, none of them are hitting the nutted score you need to be in the optimal lineup. So that's an interesting thing to think through. I guess to put a bow on that conversation with the Bills, when you play Allen, if you are saying like, hey, he is going for 40 or whatever, and he's spreading it around, are you wanting to play somebody on the Saints because you're saying, hey, maybe they do get pushed a little more, or is this not a spot where you would even bother with something on the other side?
Sure. I mean, they're certainly letting Rattler off the leash. He was even throwing like middle of the fourth quarter last game when they were like down 30. I actually kind of think there was a little bit of like Ohio State narrative, which I might have missed going into that game with JSN Olave, because Olave was being super fed when he didn't even need to be in the game with his injury history. So there was that. But yeah, they're certainly letting Rattler play. So if you got a 1 quarter of garbage time, I don't know if it would be the same like spot for like someone like Olave, but maybe that would be their MO to just like get him on the field and have practice in the garbage time.
Well, Rattler is certainly cheap enough. I ran an initial sim just with my basic process here, not doing any edits.
Yeah. I mean, it would be more from the angle of like Allen, stack him or not, and then maybe Olave on the other side.
Olave, yeah. I got a tiny bit of Rattler, but like a fraction of a percent.
Yeah. Let's see here. Yuda, are there any other kind of input volatility spots that you might want to IKB this week? Anything jump out to you from that perspective?
I don't think so much so from volatility, but I haven't looked super hard on like the injury and changes in roles.
Yeah, one that Michael Scott, I assume it is the Michael Scott, brings up here. He's talking about this situation with Tampa, which does have a lot of pieces in flux. Obviously, no Mike Evans. We might get Chris Godwin back, probably in limited. Wirfs is going to be back, so bolstering the offensive line a bit. Michael's talking about Otten here potentially being a beneficiary. How are you thinking about the Bucs overall?
Oh, well, the pricing makes it extremely difficult as far like even Baker, and I mean Puka is like 6'8". So I mean, I don't think I can get there on that, because like when you're talking about input volatility, it can only be on someone like Godwin, and there's just no way they're actually gonna make him full go.
Yeah. What is
I'm
that?
only getting a little like Puka. That's all I'm getting so far.
Yeah. And I was going to say, what is that? Ibuka is definitely past the eye test. Like he seems like he's ready for an alpha role. Is that worth the price? Because there also is an element of sticker shock of like, hey, this rookie we're paying $6,800 for.
I think there's like a limit to how far you can go with sort of buying the top, because there's like 11 games. So for him to do the same as like these guys around him, it's just going to take so much. And like, it could almost only come with like some type of game stack, because you would never get there on raw points.
Yeah. Yeah. Does this overall game environment intrigue either of you? I mean, I guess you kind of have some of the same pricing difficulties with the Eagles, where everything's so priced up. It's really hard to get into this game outside of one-offs, I'm guessing.
Yeah. It's the Eagles side isn't that bad. It's similar to last week. It's just that instead of Puka, you have Ibuka. It just makes it much more difficult to work in when the projection gap as far as those two, and I mean, there was some difference in price, but Puka would have been like 5 points higher in projection. So it's just asking a lot.
Yep. let's see here. Let's talk about some favorite game environments, maybe some contrarian stack opportunities. We obviously have the 4 late window games that all have pretty good totals, all over 47. So we'll be a late charging / late swap kind of slate. But Yuda, what jumps out to you as some games you might be getting into?
I quite like the Chargers Giants. I don't know. I mean, Dart might be a little bit chalky from like a cash build standpoint. I don't know if the game is particularly chalky. But I think Giants are very friendly, yielding like the explosive plays. They've been like the highest in man coverage for years now, and Ladd McConkey doesn't really profile, at least from college. You wouldn't profile him as like a man beater, but he's done really well beating 1v1s at the pro level. And then when you factor in his teammates are like the quintessential zone coverage beaters like Keenan Allen, you just picture him knowing exactly where to be, like soft spots in the defense on third down. And then Quentin Johnston is like the quick hitter, wide receiver screen, crossers, like that's also zone beating. So that might actually be a little bit neutered there. The only holdup would be like the Giants' pass rush is pretty tough. So like, on a given play, because when it's man coverage, you only really need find that one moment or like a few instances a game where the pressure didn't get there, and then the 1v1 gets beat, and that's basically 50 yards every time.
You mentioned the zone man stuff, and obviously through 3 weeks, it's been a pretty flat, target share distribution between those 3 Chargers receivers. So like they play the Chiefs, they play the Raiders and Broncos. Are those primarily zone teams? Is that why you think it could have been spread out through 3 weeks and then concentrate more this week?
Well, Denver is also a man team, but Raiders are quite skewed towards zone. But no, I just think that historically, it's like Ladd has done better, and the other two do profile very, very much as zone guys. And also, you have like the idea where the Giants are pretty low resistance as far as like the coverage and like their ability to stay in a game. Like it's just like they give up so many explosives. So I also think that when it's a spot like that, there's kind of less downside to funneling these targets and looks to like your squeaky wheel. And I don't think like the player, Ladd, or the coach has said anything about like his lack of production relative to the other guys. But when basically you can control how the stats flow, you actually want them to, you actually want to make everybody happy. There is some regression there. If in the like pretty decent likelihood, more than normal, that they can do whatever they want.
Nerdy, how do you handle spots like this? I mean, the Chargers are interesting in that, everyone was kind of on them last week. They were popping in a lot of sims. They kind of don't get home last week, at least as a stack. I don't think they're like projecting awesome this week. I don't think there's going to be a lot of steam. Do you go in and like adjust the projections a little bit, boost it if you are wanting to get more of them?
I usually have other means of achieving that, but I would say, just to hear what you described, like that's a really good example of a very attractive high volatility, where when you have a receiver that produces points in big chunks, like that's for big contests, you love to see that when you can get that at lower ownership, because that can be a case where there's a really good example to go back to earlier question of where, understanding what the projection actually is can really help you. Like it's sort of like a home run hitter in baseball that's either striking out or getting a home run. It's the same kind of dynamic where if you think Giants are just going to be one-on-one with this kid, and when he beats them, he's got 70 yards and 2 touchdowns or whatever, like that's very attractive, as opposed to the guy that's potentially getting more targets, but it's not as chunky, if that makes any sense. We like that volatility in our tournaments. for those kinds of plays.
Yeah, it especially too. I mean, this is like the perfect storm, right? Where Ladd's price really hasn't come down relative to his performance in the box score. And then the chalk is going to gravitate to Keenan like it has been. And he's had that high floor. From a points per dollar perspective, Ladd just isn't going to pop. So this seems like a really contrarian spot. I guess I'll ask you, go ahead, Nerdy.
I was just going to say, just looking at my stupid unedited sim, like I'm only getting like 2-3% of them. So like, if you like this analysis, then that's another sign that it's a good kind of spot to get in, where the sort of agnostic projection is perhaps underrating somebody like that.
I think like it's important to note that when I say I like targeting like these man coverage spots in general, not just because there's a greater split between alphas that are just more suited to beat 1v1s. It's just that sort of like when they hit, it's just much more variance. It's more likely to yield a big play, and it's also more likely to have an interception.
Is there any concern? Do you think the Chargers need to get pushed? Like, do the Giants need to hang in this game for Ladd?
No, you do not want them to hang, in my opinion, in what I'm talking about. Because if they hang, it's because like they're featuring Skattebo to make it life a little easier for Jackson Dart. And that's going to slow the game down. So I'd rather it be like a situation where the Chargers just get theirs. Ladd might even not have to do much in the fourth quarter, and maybe it's like neighbors on the other end coming back.
Yeah. What is your read on Dart, just like as a player? Obviously, first career start, kind of a tough task against this Chargers defense, but you think he's got the juice?
I can only say that it's probably going to be really rough right now. And I don't even think they want to like hurt his confidence too much. So like, I think they're really going to try to keep it simple for him and probably run as much as they can for as long as they can.
Yeah.
I assume that's pushing a lot of the Skattebo ownership that I'm seeing. Is that assumption right? Yeah.
There's that, and it's also just his pass game involvement has been so good that him having that kind of floor of, people penciling him in for catching 4 to 5 balls, I think is making him look like
it's much easier to run on LA than it is to throw. So you're kind of hoping on Herbert to speed it up rather than Giants to keep it close.
We touched a little bit on the Atlanta game. You mentioned Penix here. I mean, this one's kind of interesting. We are going to get Mariota again. No Terry McLaurin. Atlanta at home. It sounds like you're leaving a little bit of a candle on for the Falcons passing offense to get going, Yuda.
Yeah, I am, and it was more so after like all the Washington injuries started coming in as well, where people aren't going to be interested whatsoever. The total there for Atlanta isn't even bad. The game environment isn't that appealing, but it's pretty much in line with like their season averages for years now, maybe even higher. So Penix pocket passer, it's easy to double stack, and again, like lots of man coverage in Washington. So kind of just hope something awesome happens as far as like big plays. But the stacks do themselves. It's just Pitts, Mooney, London.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, is there any, Drake London, I was listening to Pat Crane's walkthrough. He was talking about his double team rate has been pretty high this year. Would that funnel you potentially to some more Mooney and Pitts as being the beneficiaries?
I mean, that's probably a viable reason for what has happened early on. But Pitts is making people pay a little bit. Mooney might not have been healthy. But at those prices and ownership, it's certainly appealing enough.
Yeah, Darnell Mooney, 4,700.
Yeah, Drake London is, 5,700?
Yeah, and I don't even know if he gets that high because it's not that appealing of an environment with the Washington stuff.
I thought Mariota had some juice last week. I mean, he had like 22 points and they barely even let him throw. Looked pretty good on the ground. Do you think a second start they maybe let him air it out a bit more?
Check it.
I don't know if he had to do anything. They like had the defensive scores. No, he did play well. Like he's played well, like with all the limited opportunity he's had. So I'm not even that concerned that Washington can score. I guess it would be more concerning if they scored slowly, because they're kind of good at keeping the ball for long stretches.
I was surprised last week how relatively little difference there was in projection when we knew it was Mariota over Daniels. I was expecting more of a difference, but I guess they just play their game the way they want to play it with whoever's there. So
yeah, I did say like he's probably more likely to get a goal line touchdown than Daniels.
Right, that makes sense.
Do you have thoughts on the pass catchers? I mean, without Terry, obviously Debo kind of the top dog. We saw both Jalen Lane and Luke McCaffrey have about 50% snap shares. They each had 3 targets last week. Jalen Lane, kind of the explosive rookie, took a punt return to the house there. Any dart throws potentially there?
If you're stacking Mariota, you might sprinkle it, but like it's a little too uncertain, even for like a 3K receiver to do Chris Moore, Jalen Lane.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see it. I think it'd be okay with Mariota if you're like really getting into the game.
But it sounds like if you were playing this, it would probably just be through the Falcons and not really playing a bring back on this side.
Yeah, I wouldn't see. I mean, it's viable. Like it's not as if Debo is unplayable at 6K with like a more alpha role. I mean, actually, from price sensitivity, Mariota, right? Because he's super cheap and has a much better projection. It might actually be more viable if you're looking at raw projections to double stack Mariota than double stack Penix. Mm-hmm. It's just that I think the Penix scoring is more likely to come from like 2 big games, whereas like I'm not really confident that Mariota can supply big games to Debo and Ertz, also when he has some rushing ability.
Yep. Yeah, that's that same kind of rushing quarterback dilemma from the stacking. Just so much easier with the pocket passers to double them up. Nerdy, did anything else jump out at you? You said you ran an initial sim run. Anything surprise you?
No, I'm just looking at where the value drop-offs are, because that often tells me like what kinds of constructions I expect to see. So I'll take my projections and sort them by position, and then descending points, and just see where the big cliffs are in terms of pricing. And one of the big ones, I don't know if we talk about it all, is Geno Smith is very cheap. But I don't know if that's attractive at all. Let me see if I have any. Yeah, I'm getting some. I mean,
yeah, it's probably one of the more attractive for the field.
I mean, it's just so easy to just stack those cheap quarterback double stacks, and then you can just fill out with just superstars. Yep. Like, gotta be careful with those constructions though. If you just do the obvious thing, you're gonna be like mega duped. So you do have to be careful, but
yeah, your combo ownership ends up really bad because you just start with the same 4 guys at everyone.
Yeah, but it does give you some degrees of freedom elsewhere, right? So I always like to look. Usually I just run my software and let it do its thing with some adjusting. But I'm always curious to see where it makes those pivots to other constructions. So it's almost like it's saying, hey, I can do this completely different looking thing to get to, one extra stud if I get this cheap quarterback double stack.
Yuda, what's your take on this offense? I mean, the 2 big, I think, questions for people right now is, 1, is Trey Tucker a flash in the pan, or does he have a meaningful role? And 2, is Brock Bowers fully healthy? Can he pay off his price tag at $5,800?
I don't know if Brock Bowers played a bad game last week. It's just he didn't get the flow, but I thought he played fine. I mean, they're just wildly inconsistent. Geno has been good for 2 games and horrific for 1, which you can expect a little bit. And there's not too much continuity with like the line and the running back. That's actually the biggest issue. It's the line. And like the Jonty. I don't know. I actually don't know how to say his name. GT, like worst pass pro. He just needs to like sort of not look lost out there to just have any continuity, like because Gino a lot of the time he doesn't even have a chance.
Yep.
Yeah, and just looking at the tight ends on offer, I mean, there's an example where if the ownership gets too high on someone like Bowers, it starts to get really unattractive because if you generally don't want the super volatile over-owned plays, those can end up hurting you more than they help you. Like I always want my volatility in sort of the middle, lower range, where when that guy pops, like it just gives me more against the field. So I mean, I think is Bowers he's the highest projected tight end this week.
Yeah, he's the highest projected. Tyler Warren would be kind of the guy.
Warren is up there.
I mean, it was a kind of an extended garbage time, so I'm not going to read too much into the 2 Trey Tucker fourth quarter touchdowns.
Yeah. And it's also like they do really like Dante Thornton and Jack Besh too. So it's just like, how sustainable is it for him to like continue to hold on to that role? But yeah, that's an interesting spot here. I'm going to run the Sims here so we can look at some lineups and see where they line up. I had actually run them before the show. And while this is loading, one thing that was actually showing up a decent bit were the Niners. It sounds like Brock Purdy's going to go, kind of iffy on whether Jawan Jennings is going to play. Do you have any thoughts on that spot, Yuda? Because they were showing up a good bit in double stacks.
I don't mind it, but I guess I don't think they have any desire to play fast. Like I think they'd rather keep the ball. So I'm not sure if it's like I don't think it's that bad, but they want to like go 10 yards at a time, and they don't even have the explosiveness to really generate the big plays without Kittle, Ayuk.
Yep. Yeah, this was like, so here they popped up and you see 3 Brock Purdy's in like the top 6 lineups. All of them feature Christian McCaffrey. A couple of them just full-blown onslaughts, CMC, Pearsall, Jennings. The settings I got here are about a 7K field size contest, standard payout structure there.
I'm kind of more inclined at ownership to just, I guess, bet on talent with Thomas again. It's kind of like if the price keeps dropping, you're just going to keep playing it until something good happens now.
Sorry, with Thomas?
Yeah, I think personally, I probably just keep playing him until he hits at this point.
Sorry, no, I missed the name. Who did you say?
Brian Thomas.
Brian Thomas, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that one is in. I mean, it's just the Jags are so dysfunctional. They're spreading around the ball a ton right now, but you think BTJ can still kind of hit that alpha ceiling?
Right. Like the context of the Giants or the Niners offense at this moment is one where I'm not sure you can get away with like that triple stack that we have there.
I want to now look through some of these lineups based on some of the takes in the games we were looking at. So I did just search for Josh Allen. The top lineup is actually him and James Cook, no other pass catchers. The second one is also James Cook. There is one down here too. The third, that is just that completely unstacked thing. So this does kind of dovetail with what we're talking about. I guess the interesting wrinkle we didn't discuss earlier is, would you ever play these two together, or are they cannibalizing their touchdowns in a way that makes that unattractive?
I'm not going to do it, but if the Sims say it's good, maybe Dan can talk about it.
I think that's the kind of thing where if I were more of a hand builder or hands-on, I would probably only do that in the very largest contests, personally. But I mean, you look at my showdown lineup. That one had some weird shit in it that I also wouldn't do for the same reason, right? But it was such a gigantic contest. You can kind of get away with it. But yeah, I think that kind of heuristic is probably good for most situations where you're like,
this fifth lineup has that correlation we were discussing, Josh Allen and Chris Olave. and then a
Uh-huh.
bunch of other different games. So that checks out kind of how we were discussing it.
Yeah, there's actually multiple Olave. There's one down there too. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to include all here. For those of you listening via audio, we are screen sharing Run the Sims, which you guys can get 10% off with promo code Pete. We are building lineups. You can go in, you can tweak target shares, you can tweak, game totals, pace, all of that kind of stuff, and then run Sims and look at different scenarios. But yeah, the one up here, I just filtered for the Olave teams. Here's the second one does include Keon Coleman with the Olave bring back. So get to it, but doesn't look like an uber smash relative to some of the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of different constructions would be viable, and I'd just be inclined to do the one that people don't like.
Yeah.
That is viable, if you can figure that out. Because you can make an argument for many different constructions there in terms of which and how many pass catchers to do.
With you liking Lad this week, and I did just search for him, Yuda, is that stuff, do you like him always tethered to Herbert, or is he a piece that you'd also one-off in other lineups?
In the context of like the other two producing a lot at Lad's expense, it doesn't really matter. For him in general, I guess it doesn't really matter because he is kind of a receptions dependent. So he could get there on its own. He'll hit the bonus on occasion. But I mean, my whole point was that like his explosiveness is a little underrated. And so like you remember he had the playoff game for like 37. It's that like I think he's like lost his luster as like a true alpha at this moment, but I think that is still the most likely outcome within that group of three receivers, rather than something more like even.
For sure. This top lineups with him is kind of interesting. It's not a Herbert lineup. It's a Caleb double to Cole Kmet and DJ Moore. It has both Lad and Hampton, CMC Darnell Mooney, who we showed a little love to, and then Amon-Ra St. Brown as a one-off. That's kind of a fun lineup there.
Yeah. I mean, my take is kind of just like Lad speeds it up. So in that context, Herbert could do pretty well, but it also opens up like the Giants receivers. And I guess there's only one you can play realistically. Yeah. So that, in my opinion, like that's kind of my lean for how I would play it.
Nerdy, what do you tell people who, and again, not that this lineup is scoring well, I'm filtered here, but it's not unusual that if you're reviewing Sims and it's like, okay, this one's telling me to play Austin Hooper and Zach Ertz. So kind of one uber punt tight end, one other cheap tight end. That always makes people feel gross. Like if you're ever hand building that, you're probably never getting there. How do you say you got to trust the Sims on some of these double tight end builds?
I say don't worry about it for the most part. Like, do what you want there. If you don't like it, especially in NFL, there's so many things you can build. So if it gives you the heebie-jeebies, you can go ahead and filter it out. My philosophy is always to, in my own process, to just get things where it does what I want. So if my process is spitting something out I don't want over and over again, first I make sure I really don't want it, and then I figure out why it's doing it, and then I try to get rid of it. So I try to let things just come out organically. It can be difficult, especially in very large top-heavy contests, to know the difference between, doing something weird and good and doing something weird and bad, right? Because, you may have hit on something that's very under-owned, and it could be under-owned for a very good reason, right? Maybe it's just bad. So I think if you're in an uneasy spot, like you just can't really tell whether you like something or not, just pivot to something else. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Let's see here. Yuda, let's see if we can find a Penix lineup that looks decent here. Not 49ers. Come on here. Penix, we will make sure. Okay, so yeah, a 95% here. The top one is just a skinny stack with Darnell Mooney. The second one, though, has the London in Mooney stuff. And kind of as expected, I'm not seeing any Commanders in these top lineups either. So seems to like it just straight like you did.
Yeah, it's because you don't need to. It's they're low owned enough, and they have that high enough target share that even if they score 20, 21 points or something, you get there on efficiency.
Yep. All right, guys. This was a strong show. Love getting the combo of the ball knowing and some sim insights from Nerdy and Yuda here. Any other final thoughts or takes you didn't get off your chest? I'll go to you first, Yuda.
No, I got everything. Just congrats, Dan.
Thank you.
On the heater.
Yep, bit of a heater. Better to be lucky than good is always my advice. So just get lucky. That's what I would do.
There you go. Get lucky. And if you want to be like Dan, you can see here on the screen, we've obviously been in the main slate, but you can head over here to the showdown slate. If you want to get up early tomorrow to play some Dublin showdown, you can come in here. You can run the sims, tweak your market shares if you want to IKB any of this stuff, and then go about picking off your lineups for the showdown slate so you can win 300K. Like NerdyTenor, check it all out at Run the Sims, 10% off with promo code Pete, all those different packages, including the Shady Advice diversity lineup diversity tool, which is really helpful if you're looking at specific portfolio sets and want to figure out how to maximize the lineups and not cannibalize yourself essentially in these. After this, I'm going to head over and fire up a new stream, although you guys will be redirected. We're going to walk through the underdog slate. And speaking of underdog, I always got to shout out Nerdy. Love getting his sims for the Battle Royale slate. He posts those in the in-game syndicate Discord. If you guys are subs over there, love looking at the granular stacking rates and kind of the field exposures for how to play that slate optimally. And then you can go exploitative from there if you'd like. So yeah, check that out. And until next time, I'm Pete for Nerdy, for Yuda, for JM. Thanks to everybody hanging out in the chat. Good luck in week 4. We'll see you guys next time.